So, Molly, why don't we start with you? Give us, if you can, sort of a feminist perspective here. This is actually, in many ways, a significant film.
Well, it's practically the only explicitly feminist film that's ever come out of Hollywood, I think. You know, really, when you think about it, either current films or old films, it's all there on the surface. It's not implicit or subtext. How many people here have seen it before? Not that many. Yeah. I think in some ways it seems very modern just because we haven't had and also it's sort of very up to date because these are all things that have been talked about recently with female candidates and the whole idea that, you know, men can do certain things and be aggressive and get out on the campaign trail and tell it like it is and everybody admires them and respects them. And women do the same thing and they're thought of as bitches and unfeminine. And this is the whole point here. And yet it's done it's such beautiful comedy. And I think it wouldn't have been possible. I mean, I think one reason you don't have films like this is you need first of all, it's a male-female screenwriting team, married, right. Ruth Gordon and Garson Kanin. And so you have this equilibrium in the writing, and then you have this couple who had this incredible rapport, who shared, you know, who had a long and sort of not that well-known at the time affair. And if you didn't have this tremendous fund of good feeling between them, I don't think you could get away with all this, because it's scrapey, and also they're pretty old at this point. You know, it's amazing to have they must be the oldest couple in your book as a romantic couple.
I did a previous book in the early 90s. It was a coffee table book about romantic films, comedies and dramas, and we did a section on married romances, and there's not a lot of them. This, of course, is one of them.
Well, because they're considered, once they get married, they're not considered romantic anymore. Right. Yeah.
Molly, I'm going to get back to Dan in a second, but was this, given the underlying premise of the film, the equality of the sexes, before there was the sexual revolution and the emergence of the feminist movement, was this a controversial film? Aside from the fact that it had very appealing characters, it was comedic, it was romantic, but the premise, was it in fact threatening to people? I mean, that bodybuilder woman, she was pretty freaky, right?
Well, that's what's ticklish about it, or risky, is humiliating Spencer Tracy that way. And if he weren't such a mensch, you couldn't do that. I mean, there are very few Hollywood men that
Gregory Peck couldn't do that.
No, not
right.
the real romantic ones would be completely emasculated by that. But there's something so sort of down to earth and rugged, and this is where they play off each other so great. In Woman of the Year, she's the kind of sophisticated one she speaks 7 languages, and he's the meat and potatoes reporter. And so there's this contrast between her sort of angularity and his roundness that makes for a kind of a great dynamic between them.
Dan, tell us about this film from the perspective of a romantic comedy.
Okay, first I want to apologize for taking my jacket off. I'm a bit warm. This is the first time I'm in a law school lecture hall in about 30 years, you know, facing a professor. I was afraid you were going to ask me about Blackacre. In terms of romantic comedies, I said one of the things that's unusual about this is that it's about a married couple, because not only, you know, as you said, you know, the romance is over, but most of the romantic movies about married couples are usually about one of them having an affair, because the most romances are boy meets girl, boy loses girl, boy gets girl, or, you know, some permutation of that. And marriage, especially like you go back all the way back to classical drama, the story ends with the marriage.
Story, yeah.
And so most of the movies with married couples they're about affairs, they're family sitcoms, or, and this was unusual, they're about something else. The Thin Man series are wonderful romantic comedies about a married couple who really love each other, but they're murder mysteries. And because the murder mystery carries the burden of the plot, we don't have to worry about getting them together. Here we have actually the structure of the romantic comedy where they break apart and have to get back together again.
What Stanley Cavell talked about is the comedy of remarriage. So that is a theme in quite a few of the screwball comedies, because we really can't have adultery anyway in Hollywood movies at the time. As you point out, the production code was very heavy at this time.
Yeah, the big controversy in this movie was not controversial. It was very successful.
Yeah.
When they were going through the process of making it, the one thing that the production code office got very nervous about was David Wayne's character, the songwriter. And I'm quoting here, they said, there should be no indication that Kip is a pansy. That was their word. And the irony, of course, is he's modeled on Cole Porter, there's a cute story about how they got Cole Porter to write the song. And of course, George Cukor, who directed it, was also gay. But that was something that they simply could not do. That was the one thing they had to be. And although they get that one great line in there, which I have to admit I laugh at every time, even though it's politically incorrect. When he says, "You almost convinced me to become a woman," and Spencer Tracy mutters, "Wouldn't have far to go." Because it's less driven as an insult than it's the character. That's how Adam is feeling at the moment.
And David Wayne gets his own back.
Right.
There's such a balance in it, so nobody ever has the upper hand for very long. So
That's the beauty of this film. And then when I was writing about it, that I remark at the end that this is a battle of the sexes in which nobody wins. They each, and it's why I don't like Woman of the Year. Woman of the Year is an interesting film, but in the end, it's about the humiliation of the Katharine Hepburn character. And Adam's Rib, in the end, they each get the win, but they also each get to one up the other. And the moment I love in this film is when he finally forces her to admit that violence is wrong. He's not angry with her because, I'm the man and this is the way it should be. It's because he believes in the rule of law. It's a matter of principle. And when she concedes that, the look on his face as he bites off the licorice gut is absolutely priceless.
This is very much a revenge movie, though, right? I mean, if you think about it, in front of the narrative, we've seen this, we had the confession a few nights ago. I mean, really, it's a comedic film, but it's really in the context of a revenge film. And yet what we don't see here is, although there's an intimation of it when Katharine Hepburn is first interviewing her client, where she says, well, I wasn't really, she says, I was like, as if I was in a dream. They don't plead insanity.
No, that's what you're set up for, but it doesn't work.
You're set up to...
Well, it's a completely political point she's trying to make.
Right, and if she was insane, it would lose its force. And in a way, I don't know if there was someone the other day who invoked the film A Time to Kill. It's odd how the film, even the jury closing, the summation, looked a little like Matthew McConaughey's. I had never thought that John Grisham had ripped off Adam's Rib. But he might have, that there is this idea of look at my client and flip it, which is exactly what happens in A Time to Kill. Flip it. And if you flip it, then you see you would feel differently.
It's about the double standard.
Right.
And the double standard is almost implicit in what I was saying about Hepburn and Tracy, too, that you always, no matter what he does, and this is more so in Woman of the Year, he's always lovable, whereas she's always a little edgy and not always sympathetic. It's one of the things I like about her, that she's willing to do that, though. But she was box office poison for a long time.
For a long time, until she made her comeback with the Philadelphia story. This is the movie that people who knew them said this is the closest to what they were really like in real life. That kind of comic tension between them, that they really enjoyed.
Well, it's also, it's very consciously a sort of performance. I mean, it's theater, and it's sort of marriage is theater, and we're always performing, even in our most intimate moments. They're really performing for each other, and that's Cukor too. I mean, he really has a theatrical background, and all the actors. And the scene you talk about, I think, is one of the great scenes where she's interviewing Judy. I mean, this was Judy Holliday's first movie, and you have a good story about how they persuaded her to do it, and then to accept her, and that is all in one take, which is extraordinary, that one scene where she's interviewing her in the jail. And I think Judy Holliday there are all these silences, and they're so eloquent. It's just a
I love that
marvelous
bit about,
scene.
Thank you, thank you,
Thank
you.
And she's
Thank
so
you.
wonderfully proletarian. I mean,
so that women would do that.
Yeah,
Men wouldn't do that.
yeah,
Thank you.
Yeah.
No, thank you.
Yeah, it's an interesting scene, and it's shot that way for a reason. Do we have time for me to tell that whole story?
And that's why we brought you
Okay, because the surface story here, in terms from a legal point of view, is the conflict of interest of a husband and wife on opposite sides of the same case. But there's another interesting conflict of interest here that you wouldn't know, unless you read my book. The people making this movie, George Cukor, the director, Garson Kanin and Ruth Gordon, the screenwriters, were involved in another project. Garson Kanin had written Born Yesterday, which starred Judy Holliday on Broadway, made her a star. Columbia Pictures, now this is an MGM movie, Columbia Pictures had bought the rights to Born Yesterday, and Harry Cohn, who was a real nasty piece of work, said, I'm not going to hire that fat Jewish broad for my movie. You can get away with that in the theater when people are far away from the stage, but not on the screen. So he didn't want Judy Holliday. Well, Cukor wanted Judy Holliday, and Garson Kanin wanted Judy Holliday. So what they decided to do was to cast her in Adam's Rib over at MGM, build up her part, and use that to persuade Harry Cohn to hire her over at Columbia. And they made her a number of decisions here that I suppose, like if this wasn't a bar exam, you would say was a possible violation of fiduciary duty here, because they were doing things not what was in the best interest of the movie for MGM, but what was going to persuade Harry Cohn over at Columbia. That long shot where Katharine Hepburn is practically from the back, and we're focusing on Judy Holliday, that was done deliberately. When they finished that take, I think it was the cameraman said, all right, now let's get the reverse angle. And Katharine Hepburn said, no, this is the way it's supposed to be. Because they were going to use this scene to sell Harry Cohn. In fact, when Cohn started hearing rumors around Hollywood about how Judy Holliday was stealing the film, and there were these rumors going around, Katharine Hepburn arranged for these rumors to start being passed. He said, well, send me some footage. This is something the studios would do. Oh, you're making a movie with someone I'm considering. Send me some footage of this person. So instead of sending the rushes, the raw footage, they had this highly polished, scene that they had now finished, done all the work on, and they inserted some glamour shots of Judy Holliday that are not in the film, that were shot specifically to persuade Harry Cohn. And in the end, he hired her. I don't think he was happy about it until Born Yesterday became a huge hit and she won an Oscar. So it was a nice happy ending. But all of this is going on behind the scenes. She turned down the part. She thought it was too small a part. And there's a knock on her door in her apartment in New York one day, and there's Katharine Hepburn and Spencer Tracy saying, we want you to be in our movie. And according to her biographer, she had to leave the room for a moment. She was so overwhelmed that these two stars that she had been watching all her life were at her door pleading with her to be in the movie.
That happens to me all the time. But I'm not going to leave the Fordham gig. This is where I am. It's sort of interesting. One subtext of the film is that it doesn't matter what the legal principles are. What matters is the performance, the performative dimension of what happens in courtrooms. And it's interesting because this is theater, portrayed by two of America's leading actors. And I wonder whether you have some thoughts about that subtext of the film, that it really doesn't matter what the law is. Katharine Hepburn is saying it's more about the spectacle.
Well, I think the whole thing is theatrical. It's just in its very conception. But it is about the law in the sense that it's about the double standard in the law and the spirit of the law versus the letter of the law, which is being adjudicated all the time, isn't it, in trials?
Right. Yes and no, right? I mean, yes and no. I mean,
motivation is sort of spirit of law, isn't it?
Well, I mean, many people would argue that we don't get enough of this. We don't actually get the humanized, complex, looking at things beyond
the law, you mean, in the actual trials.
Yeah, I mean, Spencer Tracy's character is actually the paradigm, right? The paradigm of rigorous, emotionally detached, purely strict adherence. Strict adherence to legal principles. All of the material. This is why you see his exasperation when he's going, what is the relevance of all of these people? And the relevance is really, it's not just to demonstrate the double standard, because I really, honestly, even though Molly's right about the double standards, I have no clue what those women were testifying about. That they were high achievers.
Right, so women could do anything men can do.
And what that means, and they can also kill each other. Right? Yeah. I'm not sure. We saw 10 minutes of that, and now this is the third time I've seen it, and I go, what the hell is that about?
But the theatricality of it was very conscious in George Cukor's mind, the director. He came out of theater, went into film. I mean, he was show business. That was his world. When they started working on this film, Spencer Tracy hated to rehearse. You know, it was like, you know, his famous advice to actors was learn your lines and don't trip over the furniture. Hepburn loved to go into detail. She wasn't a method actress, but she wanted to learn. She wanted to know what was going on. And she and Cukor went to a murder trial in Los Angeles to see what a murder trial would be like. And they even saw, you know, like the defendant coming in all dressed up and a little flashy and then toning herself down. The interesting thing was Kukor's reaction. He had never been in court before. The only judges he had ever seen were in the movies. And he's watching this. He goes, I get it. The judge is like a director. And then in his mind, the judge directs the jury and directs the lawyers, and that's how he understood what was going on in the courtroom, and that's what he took when he went back to make the movie.
I was interested, I don't know if anyone noticed there was a African American on the jury. Right, it was kind of cool. And I'll tell you why it was cool. Because the film predates the civil rights movement, and it predates the women's movement. I mean, it's really way ahead of the curve, right? And it's really about the idea that, what was that shot of the courthouse that it said, equal justice for all men, right? All men. And yet, in fact, there was an African-American juror, and he certainly isn't receiving equal rights, and half the population who are women are not receiving equal rights. And yet, that's one of the things I was interested about the spectacle, because the implication is that justice comes in the courtroom. But maybe what Katharine Hepburn did is not to prove so much the double standard, but she understood that it's only through the performance that you can call attention to these issues. For instance, you know, the civil rights movement was not just a movement that was initiated in the courthouses with the NAACP, but there were marches, and there were sit-ins, and there was dramatic presentations.
Well, yeah, and also the just sheer numbers of women. I mean, this is happening now. The more and more women that get into higher office, and the more possible it is for others, it just changes the whole atmosphere. And that's what she's trying to do, change the atmosphere.
But again, doing it by way of theater. Not really. I mean, I think this is, to me, she's really not arguing fine legal points. She's really making a presentation. And also, there was something there that I thought was cool in a way. It reminded me of the O.J. Simpson trial, the way every day they showed you the front page of the newspaper. So it was like court TV. You know, that was the equivalent of it, that all the various New York papers were obsessed with the
And you
trial.
feel also that she just laps up this publicity. I mean, and this was true of Katharine Hepburn, too. She's this huge ego, a much bigger ego in a sense than Spencer Tracy, certainly in the film. And she loves the applause. She loves having a song after her, and she's just preening all the time, whereas he's got a million ways to look disgruntled and fed up, and it's just so
and you're right, Molly. There is an intimation of that early where Katharine Hepburn gets the idea, I want this client. And it's as if
high profile. She
what
wants
she
to be on
realizes
the
is
front
career-making
page.
case, right? It's the idea of the career.
The cause is important, but also her
Right.
her ego is huge.
Now, you said something earlier that I absolutely agree with, how modern this film feels. There are a lot of old films you'll look at that are really dated, and some that just transcend their time, and some that seem ahead of their time. I saw this when I was in college in the 70s, and we were stunned then how modern it felt. The one thing that was really jarring, even besides the joke about Kip, was when that long scene where Judy Holliday is explaining the facts of the case, and she, did your husband ever hit you? Yes, knocked out a tooth. And suddenly, it's not funny. We're in a different place now when it comes to that kind of physical treatment of spousal abuse. And the movie tries to take the sting out of it when we hear she gave as good as she got. Wait till I was asleep and then bam, bam. But I don't know. That's the one thing that I don't know if they were to make this today, whether they would include something like that, because that somehow doesn't make it as amusing.
Well, it's very unusual being so explicit about feminism, and there wasn't a women's movement then. But what you do have to remember is, unlike today, in the films of particularly the 30s and also the 40s, there were so many strong women, and they were verbal. There was a lot of dialogue, and there were a lot of male-female screenwriting teams. So the women really could give as good as they got. And it might not be so explicitly about equal rights as this was, but that there was a stage set, there was an atmosphere of equality, and this is one of the reasons I think screwball comedies wear so well, because you did have this give and take that was unusual. They were not sentimental.
And also that you had a husband and wife screenwriting team. Ruth Gordon, of course, was also a well-known actress, but they wrote this together, and their inspiration. Garzon Kanan in his book tells the story about them driving back from New York to Connecticut, and she's on the verge of getting car sick, and he's trying to distract her, and finally says, tell me a story about Connecticut. And she goes, well, the story of the Masseys and the Whitneys is pretty interesting. He goes, well, what's that story? And it turns out Raymond Massey and his wife were getting divorced, and they asked their friends, a husband and wife lawyer team, the Whitneys, to handle their divorce. It was going to be a nice, friendly, amicable divorce. Well, Kanan doesn't provide the details, but when the dust settled, not only were the Masseys divorced, the Whitneys got divorced. Wait, it gets better. Raymond Massey married Mrs. Whitney, and Mr. Whitney married Mrs. Massey. And those were long-lasting marriages. That was the inspiration for this movie. I think there was an interesting movie right there.
Oh, absolutely. Somebody should do that.
But they decided that it was this thing about the husband and wife lawyers on opposite sides of a case and the tensions that would create. And right from the beginning, when they started writing this script on spec, they didn't even know if they were going to be able to sell it. They said, all right, so Spence does this and Kate does that. They had already cast their friends Spencer Tracy and Katharine Hepburn in those parts.
I was just going to ask you, what about it as a courtroom drama? I mean, it's so fanciful. I think courtroom dramas are never do that anymore. They really stick to what would be plausible or what the judge wouldn't throw out.
Well, the movie goes off the rails with the photo op at the end.
Yeah.
I mean, gee, when the families reunite and everybody's shaking hands.
Including the mistress.
Right, the mistress is like checking her hair when she's sitting taking pictures with the children. You know, it goes off the rails, which actually reminds me, one question I wanted to ask to you. Do we have an entirely different movie if we kill the husband instead of wound him in the arm?
It's not a comedy anymore, I don't think.
We lose... There's no potential romantic comedy if the husband is dead.
I mean, she has to have her eyes closed too. I mean, she has to be just a goof up. I mean, I think.
And she claims she never intended to kill anybody.
Right.
She just wanted to
she
scare
couldn't
them.
have if she'd wanted to. I don't think.
Right, and we kind of know we're playing it for comedy when she pulls out the gun and then she pulls out the booklet.
On how to.
Right, how to do it.
Yeah.
So.
But if she'd killed him, it would have been more serious.
Yeah.
Right. Even it's like she was a quick learner. Right outside that door,
right.
she knew how to go.
If she kills him, it becomes a dark comedy. Right. And it might be a comedy about the lawyers, but we're not laughing at the rest of them anymore.
No, I think you'd have a hard time being sympathetic to her
But
cause.
I mean, but in a way, the question you asked me, Molly, is this a classic Hollywood movie of its era in the way that it sews it up in a kind of life-affirming, sugar-coated, happy end? I mean. There's the whole resolution of the trial has that kind of real dated feel of it. I mean, she is guilty.
Right.
I mean,
but comedies have happy endings, so they did then.
Well,
I mean,
she gets off because yes, she broke the law, and Spencer Tracy's character is correct that she should have been punished for it.
For some level of it,
for some
even if there are
level of it.
mitigating circumstances.
Right, but for mitigating circumstances, and sometimes that it works out that way. And whether that's a happy ending there, we don't know what happens to these people. There's that moment where they're putting on a show, another theatrical moment for the press, and then they're out of the movie. We never see them again. We don't know what happens to them. And you could just tell from all the reactions between the husband and the mistress that that hasn't ended. So I don't see the happy ending there. The happy ending is with Adam and Amanda. And if you do a lot of reading on this film, you'll find some people who think, oh, the fight continues because she's going to run for judge against him. I don't buy that. I think that's just a tease, that she's just kind of like needling him a little bit. But
she's proved her point. I don't think she has to.
She doesn't have to do it. And she's just as happy to let him be the judge and let him have the set the stage for that.
And his eyes have been open somewhat too. I mean, he's still committed to the letter of the law, but still, I think he never was a sexist pig to begin with. But now he'll look at the law differently and look at this kind of defendant.
Well, do we get a sense of that? That the outcome of their fight, post-trial fight, is that he now has a deeper emotional sense of what happens to people, not just the law, but he's able to humanize the law and see underneath
I think you'll have to think twice about professional women in a sense. I mean, I think there is something you don't know. I mean, he's still going to stay, he's still a prosecuting attorney, but I think...
Well, it's even better, Molly, because he may be a judge.
Yeah,
so we
that's
now
right,
have,
that's
we have a more
right.
sympathetic,
Yeah,
humanized
yeah,
judge.
yeah.
And so to me, that's even a happier ending.
Yeah,
He'll be
right.
in a position to
Yeah,
incorporate all that he learned.
Well,
You know, I was intrigued by something I don't think I noticed. This is the first time I noticed it. They're getting divorced. They don't hire a lawyer. They get a CPA. The two lawyers somehow don't know any divorce lawyers. It's all done neatly, and they're all, I mean, who shared their share? You know, this equal distribution of property.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
in one scene, they're, you know, kicking the crap out of each other, and then he gets the coat, and the underwear goes back to her, and they don't need to formalize it in a legal document.
You think that's a divorce there? I think they're just going through their quarterly taxes.
Yeah.
That they're just going through the paperwork, and the divorce is to come.
Yeah.
And, you know, like
separate.
But it's a
Yeah,
premonition
yeah.
of the division of their lives,
Right.
the
It's a
separation.
preliminary sort of
Right, Adam's
dividing
rib
up. Yeah.
is really now being split
Yeah,
in a very,
yeah.
and we have an intimation of their future, and
Yeah.
his, you know,
this is actually kind of fun in that her argument is, and this is, of course, very daring in 1949, women are the absolute equal of men. Women can do anything that man can do, except for, you know, viva that little difference. And his argument in the end is, yes, and that means men can do anything women can do. Get emotional, start crying, winning an argument unfairly by turning on the waterworks. And so he really does come around to that viewpoint in an unexpected way.
Well, he's always been a pretty good house. I mean, he says in the beginning, I want a wife who does wifely things, but in fact, he's the one with the apron. He's the one that sees that the kettle is boiling. I mean, he's much more sort of domestic than she is.
well, I think that's one of the real ironies of the film, that we keep forgetting. Did I hear this for the first time? Is she a Yale law graduate? Is that what
That's
he
what
said?
he said, yeah. Yeah.
She's, you know, her patrician accent is so hard to hear anything.
But I think he also says Bryn Mawr, which is where she did actually go. Did you mention?
Oh, is that right,
then?
Bryn Mawr?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
I'm
mean, she's
sorry,
supposed to
this
be.
whole performance, I kept thinking of Kate Blanchett in the Scorsese film.
Yeah.
Hey, she really had the
She's
cheekbones
probably what
going.
most people think of as Catherine
Exactly,
Hepburn now.
right. The younger people go, yes, just think Kate Blanchett. But it just seemed, nobody even wants to talk about the obvious, which was even somebody was talking about this at one of the earlier film festival dates. It was when we did the Paper Chase. In the early 70s at Fordham, there were only about 10 or 12 women, fewer, in the graduating class.
Really?
Right? Oh, yeah. So
Yeah.
one can imagine
What
the Katharine Hepburn, she must have been a rocket scientist. She was a Yale graduate in the 30s? I mean, I don't even know who that would have been, if that would have been. And so there's just something here that's very much taken for granted that she was
well, it's her, but
Right.
everyone accepts this with her. It's one reason why people had mixed feelings about her at the time. She was just too patrician and too smart and too this and too that, and also professional. Whereas most women, I mean, generally you would have a professional woman, and she really would have to be taken down a peg, and she would have to recognize that she really just needed a man to complete her. That was generally the...
And also, again, the point that Molly made earlier is, this is the little twist and trick in the film, is that Spencer Tracy, the film is introducing you to this married couple that they're astonishingly progressive in all ways.
Yeah.
And now they have to confront their latent prejudices about the battle of the sexes.
Yeah.
It's not apparent in their lives.
That's right, because they have it so they don't have children. They don't have to worry about who does what with the children. You have that more in Woman of the Year.
They're a power couple.
Yeah, a power
right?
couple. Exactly.
They're totally
Exactly.
a power couple,
Yeah.
and they don't think about, you know, that whole question, that scene that you love with Judy Holliday when you said, any children? What do you work? No, I'm a housewife. Any children? Yes, I'm a mother.
Yeah.
You know, so she reminds her, there's this other role for women, Catherine.
Well,
the way everyone
she's
else
just not
lives.
the client you want when you're fighting. You know, that's what's so Katharine Hepburn coming up against this little lump who just won't conform in any way to all the causes that she's trying to espouse.
I'm curious, how many people here were seeing Judy Holliday for the first time? A lot of you. Judy Holliday was not only a wonderful comic actress, she was a brilliant woman who excelled at playing these often dumb characters. But I understand that she had an extremely high IQ, and was, like, off camera was an absolutely brilliant young woman.
I mean, for a fat Jewish girl.
Yes.
I mean,
don't.
this is the first time I heard this. That this is the rap that she gets in the movie is the rap that people thought of her as in life.
Right. When she was offered the part, where she said one of the reasons she turned it down, she didn't like the line where she quotes her husband calling her fatso, because she was in real life sensitive about her weight. And she said that was a deal breaker. She would not do that. and Hepburn said, oh, well, they'll change the line then. And Judy Holliday said, they will? She goes, oh, yeah, they're writers. They know lots of words. And by the time they did the movie, it was Holliday who insisted they put the line back in.
But she was also, it's important, she was not physically, but she was huge, her career. Yeah. She was perhaps the leading female comedian of her era.
Of the 50s. And she died in her mid-40s. Basically her career her movie career starts with this. Born Yesterday, she wins the Oscar for. She does a string of films in the 50s. I think her last film is 1960, and that's it. And she's dead at I think it was like 44. So it's go put them on your Netflix list. Go rediscover Judy Holliday.
Let's get the questions. Let's get it going. Heat it up. I know.
I know.
So true.
But she didn't have the classic Hollywood good look, glamour look.
Katharine Hepburn looked particularly thin.
Okay. And the other question is, how old? You were talking about the ages. How old was Spencer Tracy and Katharine Hepburn in this film?
I don't remember how. Tracy.
She's in her 40s.
She's maybe in her early 40s.
Early 40s.
He's about 49 or 50 and looks a lot older. He's
49 in Adam's Rib?
Yes.
I look good.
49 or 50. He was a hard drinker, and it was taking his toll. At this point, he's still in fairly good shape, and he used to joke, oh, chocolates turned me into a character actor. But it was the hard drinking. When he would finish a movie, he could go off on a binge and disappear for a while, and then he would show up, and Hepburn would nurse him back to health. He was always completely professional making a movie. It was never a problem on the movie, but then he would get this black mood and just go off on a tear. And I guess he died in his 60s, right after doing their last film together, Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. But it was his last few films, the late 50s, early 60s, he's very fragile, and the director, particularly Stanley Kramer, is coddling him and working around him. And then when he comes to life on camera, it's like it's all there. Like you see Inherit the Wind.
I was just going to say, he really was, if Spencer Tracy was alive, we'd invite him for the forum. Because he had really great movies, Inherit the Wind, Judgment at Nuremberg, and Adam's Rib. He had really 3 of the classic law films.
Well, they also helped each other's career. They kept each other going longer than they would have as a sort of romantic couple. Because it's like Ginger Rogers and Fred Astaire. He was kind of fey, and she gave him a kind of earthy sexiness. And they give each other something that they didn't have alone. So I think they really, it was a great sort of mutual thing.
You had a follow-up.
How did Holliday die in their...
It was a heart attack. She had heart disease.
Thank you.
Yes. I'll come back to you.
What do you think about them having the same pet names for each other, calling each other Pinky?
I don't know where that came from. I do know that it's unusual that you had the married couple both with very similar names, Adam and Amanda. That was not the original intent. Her character was supposed to be Madeline. And what happened was they were trying to come up with a song for Madeline. Garson Kanin wrote something that was so awful they just rejected it. And Hepburn said, oh, well, why don't we ask Cole Porter to write a song? And they look at her like she's insane. Yeah, oh yeah, we can get Dwight Eisenhower to police the set between takes. And so one night they were all meeting for dinner and Hepburn's late, and she says, Cole Porter can't do a song for Madeline. And they look at her, she goes, I'll explain later. And at the end of the meal, the phone rings and it's Cole Porter. And he says, I can't do a song for Madeline, but I love the script. I could do a song if you rename the character Amanda. And that's why the character became Amanda. So, why is Pinky with a Y, a Pinky with an I-E? Maybe that was, they knew someone who did that, or they had pet names like that.
Well, I think it's just also, I think it's sort of the cutesiness of it. It's sort of the the not all that attractive side of marriage when they have these pet names for each other.
Nauseating.
Nauseating on the outside. I mean, within the relationship,
right.
it's
All
fine.
right, but when you hear it in public, that
Which is great with a stenographer.
With a stop,
Yeah.
Picky with a Y or an IE, right?
I think it's also sometimes symbolism for the equality between them, that, you know, they have the same name and whether they
I'll buy that.
Well, there's a kind of androgynousness
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
Including Adam and Amanda,
Yeah.
that they really are part of the same,
One person,
the Adam's
yeah.
rib.
I think it's really a shorthand for intimacy to have nicknames.
Well, it is, but it's so excessive. There's something having it spelled out in public that makes
it's
it.
that-
I think it kind of gave a buoyancy to the marital relationship that made them more believable
Cool.
for the audience.
Behind you, there's a woman, yes.
I was taken by the fact that they lived so well, and I
Yeah.
was thinking that she probably earned the money. He was an assistant DA.
I know, good point.
There must be a disparity of income.
Well, Katharine Hepburn came to with the family money.
Okay.
But
She
I mean,
brought it into the movie.
they had this huge townhouse though, but then they're having trouble paying for this place in Connecticut.
It was absurd.
Yeah.
I mean, he was an assistant DA, and I don't know what she
She
did.
seemed to have the more successful financial career.
But really, what could it have been? I mean, that's the part that I want to say. Realistically, even if she was who she wasn't representing AT&T.
No, but
You know,
she
she
could-
wasn't a high-powered corporate New York City, Wall Street lawyer.
Oh yeah, that's fantasy then.
Right.
Yeah,
That
this
would
is
have-
Hollywood
Yeah.
That
fantasy.
would
But
have
even
never.
today, you go to movies and go, who lives like this?
Yeah.
Yeah, the people making the movies.
But she could pick and choose her clients. He had to take what was given to him.
What's interesting, you say that, there was a very interesting moment that I hope law students picked up and other people who are like thinking about law and justice, when he interviews the husband in the hospital, and he's very disparaging toward him. He says, "I'm getting my own lawyer," which just proves the guy doesn't have a clue.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Like he's got all these lawyers are lined up to
right, and that
take
they're
his case.
well. Also, it doesn't work that way.
Yeah,
He's not
right.
he's as the victim
He's so
of the
arrogant.
crime.
That's part of his
Right,
male
as the victim of the
arrogance.
crime, he's
Yeah.
not going to have a lawyer. The state is going to prosecute on his behalf, and it just showed a kind of the way people think about. I'm getting a lawyer, and I'll see
Yeah,
you
right.
in court. Yes.
So we're talking a lot about how she's arguing this political point about women and the double standard, and he's arguing about, following the letter of the law. But it seemed to me they were also sort of having a personal battle with each other about their marriage and sort of trying to prove something to each other about their marriage. And I was wondering what you thought about that.
Testing it.
Yeah, or that, both characters, different points in the movie, they question what marriage is, and he says it's a law and it's a contract, and she's
Oh, I love
talking
that.
so much about equality and that it's mutual everything. So it seemed to me that in addition to the political points they were trying to make, they were also having this sort of more personal battle in court.
Oh, of course. Of
Well,
course.
yeah,
She keeps teasing him with that. Like when she flashes her undergarments at him. Yeah, I mean, that's deliberate.
She'll use any trick, and whereas he's trying to stay sort of on the straight and narrow. But I mean, I think it's a power struggle, but it doesn't really. There is something androgynous about them because they don't have children. We don't see any of their difficulties, their marital difficulties. So it's just their theater. They're game playing with each other.
Right,
I
but
think,
notice that she says, I think a couple of times, I know you agree with me, and he doesn't say you're right. She sees his views in ways that perhaps may not be 100% accurate.
Let's take a final question back there.
I was wondering what you thought about the juxtaposition between after she shoots her husband running to him to care for him, she seemed upset, and then in the final court scene when she's released, he runs to her, the husband.
It's sort of hard to know because what they say one thing. I mean, this brutality they've described, and yet, I mean, this is maybe this sort of condescending view of the lower class. Is they what choice do they have really? They really love each other after all. I don't think we really know. We don't get into them psychologically with any kind of authenticity.
There is a certain condescension, and maybe this is a story to close on. This is, I think, also from Garson Kanan's book, where he talks about it was a summer afternoon at the Hepburn family estate on the beach. in Connecticut, and this is like 1948, and they were all talking about the Henry Wallace campaign, and they were talking about the common man, and we have to fight for the little guy, and we have to stop the big guys from pushing everyone around. And all of a sudden, I think it was her father jumps up and runs down to the beach. Get off of here! This is a private beach. You're trespassing. And Spencer Tracy is laughing his head off because, one moment they're talking about the common man, but get the common man off my private beach. Hepburn, to her credit, from what I understand, joined in the laughter. She saw the double standard that was going on there. But yeah, there is a certain condescension going on.
It's funny, I hate to be plugging this Scorsese film, but that actually happened, a little of that
scene
happened.
in that, yeah,
There's a
that's
little
that's
scene
very
with
good
Howard
scene.
Hughes, right? And,
Yeah.
and the Katharine Hepburn
Yeah.
character realizes that her family is, completely elitist, and that Howard Hughes...
Because they were very liberal for their
Right,
time and place and for their
Right.
income. I mean, he was a doctor, and
Right.
but the mother was a suffragette, and they espoused all the progressive causes, and yet they lived this very elitist life.
Yeah. I know there's so many more people that want to answer and take questions.
Well, we're going to hang out in the...
Yeah, we're going to have a book signing. Let me just have a few concluding remarks. We had a fabulous week, and so we want to thank you all for coming back. And really, it'll mark in your calendar, 3rd week of October next year. Continue to check our website, www.fordhamlawandculture.org and fordhamfilmfestival.org. Don't forget, for those of you who are still around, we have Sam Waterston on November 19th at the Time Warner Center as one of our forum conversations. I think we have one of our law firm sponsors here, Debevoise & Plimpton. Oh, my good friend Jeremy Smith. Debevoise & Plimpton is one of our sponsors so we want to thank Debevoise & Plimpton. And if you have any interest in following Debevoise & Plimpton's lead, you should get in touch with Helen Herman, who we must thank, who's the executive producer and put together this entire festival. Thank you, Helen. And lastly, before we sign books, really a lovely round of applause for our really good friends, Molly Haskell, Dan Kimmel. Thank you so much. Very grateful that they're here. Thank you.